Good morning. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I've been with the American Meat Institute for 24 years. I started in 1991, and those were the days when we faxed our press releases, and it was a big deal to have a fax back then. And boy, have I seen changes in those days. I attended Northwestern's journalism school, and I tell you that because it was a really serious journalism school. And I went on my newspaper internship, which was required, to the Jackson Citizen Patriot. And I remember on one occasion, as I was aspiring to be this big investigative reporter, I told my editor, you know, I just have a bad feeling about this one public official. And I was completely admonished by my editor because she said, we don't operate on feelings, we operate on facts. I wish it were still that way today. So what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about is where we are with the media, what the trends are, what they're saying about water and many other issues, and how we can all engage. I'd love it if I could solve our communications problems from my office in Washington, but unfortunately I think it's really going to take an army of communicators, and we're trying to develop the resources so that everyone can participate in that effort. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the resources we have. So let's look at the media landscape. I'm sure you've all heard newspapers are declining. Magazine jobs are down. TV and radio, they're sort of holding steady, but there's really a digital boom. People are getting their media. They're getting their media and their news elsewhere. So the venerable New York Times, this is their own chart, and they're showing the growth that's in the Huffington Post, USA Today, and particularly BuzzFeed. I don't know if you know what BuzzFeed is, but it's a news, I don't even know what to call it. I mean, I suppose it's a news site, but everything's packaged in lists. The top 10 things you need to know about your meat. The top 10 things you need to know about animal agriculture. And so we're sort of dumbing down the news, but that's because people are reading things on mobile devices so much, those short lists are more suited to it. And the New York Times there was an internal memo that leaked out of the New York Times that said we really need to take a page from BuzzFeed, which is really scary to think about that. So, you know, if you look at where people are getting news now, it's shifting to online and digital sources. And if you look at the tone of what we're hearing, I love to show these pictures because if you think about how we got our news back in the 60s when President Kennedy died, think about how Walter Cronkite struggled to contain his emotion and said, you know, ladies and gentlemen, the president has died. And he was holding back the tears. We don't hold back anymore. Now we've got Katie Couric in The View, and President Obama's on there, and Katie Couric's having her colonoscopy on air. And, you know, maybe we could argue that she did a good public health service, and she probably did, but there's really no holds barred anymore. We're all about reality TV. If you need to find a wife, you know, you sign up for The Bachelor. So it's just a very different world. Sorry, this clicks. And if you look at the politics of the media is much more liberal than the mainstream population. So we're getting things, they can't help it. Even those who are really dedicated to being as balanced and impartial as they can, it's still going to, their views in some way are going to be reflected in their coverage. Now there's some hope because Americans are becoming more and more skeptical about the media. And as you can see, they believe less and less that they get the facts straight or that they deal fairly with all sides. But at the same time, when you've got that constant drip, what impact is that having on how people perceive it? And if you think about how media cover stories, it's a very simple formula. And hopefully when I tell you this, you'll start to see it as you watch coverage. And Eric Desenhall gets credit for this. He's a great crisis expert. There's usually a victim, a villain, and a vindicator in media coverage. And often the victim is somebody who became ill or injured or there's been an animal harmed. And often the villain is the meat industry, animal agriculture. And the vindicator is typically a government inspector or an activist. And so very formulaic. And often when a reporter calls you, the story is typically pretty well formulated. And they're looking for you to help them, especially a broadcast reporter, give them what they want so that the story works the way they had intended. Their definition of balance is often, okay, I got two sides of the story. Well, you could have Agriculture Secretary Vilsack and the head of PETA. Is that balance? Is the credibility the same? Well, you've got two different opinions, but often that's what we see. The other thing that's very frustrating is that context seems to be optional anymore. And so you'll hear some crazy study on the air, and it could say, you know, experts say today that living near a farm will cause your hair to fall out. You know, I mean, it could be any kind of crazy association from an epidemiological report, but they won't offer the context that, but 20 other studies have said it's safe to live near a farm. So they're typically reported in isolation. And to some degree, we have to feel sorry for the media because there are job cuts. We don't have specialists anymore. When I started at AMI, I had a list of national agriculture reporters at newspapers like the Omaha World Herald and the Kansas City Star and the Chicago Tribune, and these were people who really knew ag. And those days are gone. The Chicago Tribune hasn't had an ag reporter in, I can't even remember how long. It's got to be at least 15 years. So the experienced reporters are gone. And so you've got reporters now who come at this more from a food perspective as opposed to an agriculture perspective. And often they have a vision of what the world should be. I'm going to give you a little sidebar here before I forget, but I recently attended the New York Times Food for Tomorrow conference. And I don't know if any of you read about that. Anybody read about that, what went on? Okay. It was a $1,400 conference for a day and a half, $1,400. And you got to go up to Bluestone Barns, I think it was, just north of New York City, very upscale place. Apparently it takes months to get a reservation at their restaurant. And in order to get on the panel, the U.S. Farmers and Ranchers Alliance, I know, had to make a substantial sponsorship. And I don't know the exact number, but I know it was to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars just to get on the panel. And the speakers were Mark Bittman, Michael Pollan, and other big critics of animal agriculture. There were no farmers until U.S. Farmers and Ranchers sponsored. And so we had these New York City reporters who were going to tell us how to raise food. And the dinner, this will kill you, for $1,400, I would imagine you'd be expecting a pretty good steak. The dinner was a carrot cutlet, and it was a fried carrot. And the next day for lunch, I was so grateful when they said we were having hot dogs, but then they said that they had actually made the hot dog using all sorts of variety meats and scraps that were left over when they broke down the carcass, and then they blended it with beets. So a hot dog came out on a bun, and the beet juice was bleeding purple, and I tried, but I couldn't eat it. So I thought, okay, thank God. They said when we go to the session, they're going to hand out the ice cream bars, homemade ice cream bars. And so I picked one up. I thought it was a mango sorbet, and I was eating it, and I thought there's something weird about this. And somebody said, oh, I didn't get to try that one. How's the squash sandwich? So that was their vision of what we should be eating. And it was really frustrating. And here was, you know, agriculture had invested a significant amount of money to make this delicious food possible. And in the opening session, Mark Bittman said, it's war. He declared war. And it was really frightening to hear that coming from the New York Times, in addition to the fact that the New York Times was engaging in this kind of conference with such a high fee, because that's just not what newspapers would have done. But they're so desperate now to find sources of revenue that I imagine they made a bundle on this. So while this is all happening, we've got books, movies, and TV shows that are playing in the background. That is an image from the Food Inc. website. And Food Inc. continues to be shown. I get letters all the time from students who are in these classes where they're told to watch the movie and write to somebody and tell them your feelings, and somehow they write to me. And so I respond to a lot of student letters, and they use terms like big food and factory farming. I just got one from a student who wants to interview me about my position on factory farming, and my answer now is always, I'm sorry, could you define that term for me? What is factory? I'm not familiar with that. What is it? Well, you know what it is. No, I really don't. So this term is thrown around, and I like to force people to define it. Now, coincidence, our last speaker was from UC Irvine. I'm also from California, Mission Viejo, right next to Irvine, and my niece was at Mission Viejo High School, where they actually have an ag program, which is really surprising in a place like Orange County, but they have livestock, which is awesome. But one of the teachers showed Food Inc. and to her health class as a model for eating. And so my sister called and said, "You've got to talk to Caitlin. She won't eat pork anymore." And I called and I said, "What is up?" And she said, "Well, I didn't know you squeezed them to death." And I couldn't figure out what she was talking about. And I looked at the movie, and it's got undercover footage of a stunning system that uses CO2 to stun pigs, and it's taken at this weird angle, and the pigs are standing up when they go in, and then when they're stunned, they're laying on top of each other. And to her untrained eye, and with this scary music playing in the background and no explanation, she thought they had been squeezed. So she was becoming a vegetarian. Luckily, that phase has passed. But it was really troubling to me. I did write to the school and raised objections. Luckily, I have a different last name. The teacher apologized and said, "Somebody's aunt is in the meat industry, so I have to apologize for showing you this." But Caitlin's experience is not unlike, many across the country. Believe me, I get the letters. Time just published top 30 most influential people on the internet, and here's our favorite person, the food babe, who's afraid of every chemical out there and has absolutely no scientific training, but she's out there telling everyone how to eat. I would argue that it's a good thing today that people are standing up and taking down these activists. We're seeing more and more people respond as opposed to dismiss. This is the food hunk who spoofs her. Which I think is terrific. And this is the science babe who's now speaking out and giving the facts on things. At the same time, Forbes says that Dr. Oz is the third most influential celebrity. I was very happy when a new study just came out that said half of Dr. Oz's medical advice is baseless or wrong. I have been on the Dr. Oz show, but you never saw the segment, and it's a good thing because it never aired. The segment was so horrendously produced that we raised a stink about it. We were supposed to go on to talk about ground beef and how it's made, and his producers were convinced that if you ate grass-fed beef, you didn't have to worry about E. coli. And so Dr. Oz went into some purveyor's operation in New York, and he was filmed eating raw ground beef because the guy said, "Mine doesn't have it." So we really objected, got USDA involved, and they agreed not to show that. But I had a really hard time convincing them that, no, you really did have to worry about E. coli, regardless of the production method. So I thought we had them straight, went on the air, and we went up for, when you do those shows, you have to have a little rehearsal, not with Dr. Oz, but with his producers. And so I checked the props, and he was going to show how you make ground beef, and beautiful red trimmings. I thought, okay, this is going to be accurate. But when I came back out, the red trimmings had been taken away, and there was a bowl of fat. And I was on with Mindy Brashears from Texas Tech, and she said, "Well, Dr. Oz, you can't make ground beef with a bowl of fat." And so they had to bring out the trimmings. And then I had told them, you absolutely have to talk about using a thermometer. And they kept refusing, and I brought one with me, and I offered it just before the segment, and they wouldn't take it, so I hid it in my sweater. So when Dr. Oz started talking about how to cook a hamburger, I said, "I'm sorry, I have to interrupt you." And he did not like that, because while it looks live, it's sort of semi-scripted. And I pulled the thermometer out of my sweater, and I gave it to him. But after all of this, at the end, he said, "Okay, I've listened to all the evidence. Here are my best recommendations. Only eat from the counter, never eat from the case. You want to watch that ground beef being made to look for that bacteria. Number 2, only eat organic. Number 3, only eat grass-fed. And number 4, never ever eat irradiated food." Completely backwards. So we raised a stink, and eventually the show has never aired. So that was victory. But it was incredibly insightful. But this is what's going on out there. And we know he's influential because they say when he comes on and says, if you drink pomegranate juice, you'll lose weight. Apparently retailers can't stock enough pomegranate juice. So when he gives advice, it does tend to stick. But the good news is that when we poll consumers, price and appearance continue to be the drivers. This is our recent Power of Meat top findings. And, it's not that there aren't other important factors, but price and appearance are the drivers. Controversy, however, can derail. So let's talk about that. We have a program. So here I've told you the problem. What are we going to do about it? We have a program called Meat Myth Crushers, and we're trying to bust myths one myth at a time. We've taken on 42 myths. We create short videos that are about 2 minutes long. It's me interviewing somebody, and the reason we do that is because we want people to see that face, that Food Inc. image. They want people to believe everybody in agriculture is soulless and corrupt and eats from some private meat supply that nobody else has access to. We sell the bad stuff to all the American consumers. So we want people to see our faces. So we work closely with the American Meat Science Association to make sure that what we're saying is well-rooted in science. We have a website, and anything we say is referenced. And so there are videos, and then the references are beneath it. And so I'm going to start with this is what the website looks like. And I'm going to start with some of the information on water and the environment, and then we'll see how far we can get through some of the other myths, because I think you'll enjoy it. You may learn some things you didn't realize. The vegetarians have it all solved. If we want to save our water, we just need to become vegetarians. And that is just not viable for us. But there's a big myth out there that it takes 2,400 gallons of water to make a pound of beef. And so we interviewed Dr. Jude Capper about this, and here are the actual facts. You know, the 2,400 number is something that seems to recycle from 30 or 40 years ago, but modern beef production has improved dramatically. Today it takes about 441 gallons of water to produce a pound of boneless beef. Now, when you say that without context, which unfortunately many stories do, it sounds scary, but you have to put it into context and help people understand the amount of water involved in making many consumer products. 713 gallons of water are needed to make a cotton shirt. 39,000 are needed to manufacture a car. And contrary to what many people want to believe, grain-fed animals grow to the market size 226 days faster. So grass-fed beef actually uses more water because there's more time involved in producing them. And so we constantly have to be providing that context, like just letting a faucet drip, 1 drip per second can waste 3,000 gallons of water a year. And here's more context. Certainly, it does take more water and more resources to produce meat, but meat also offers more nutrition. I'm going to get into that in a minute. Now, we're also hearing that we all need to go meatless on Mondays to save the environment, and that going meatless can have a significant environmental impact. And so we went to Frank Mittliner at UC Davis and asked him about that. And he said reducing meat consumption 1 day a week has a negligible impact. According to EPA, only 3.4% of greenhouse gases come from livestock, and if Americans cut meat 1 day a week, it would reduce their carbon footprint by 0.2%. So it's not that we don't have a carbon footprint, but we need to understand, again, where that carbon footprint fits in context. There's a UN report that came out. The UN admitted that they were in error. It was called Livestock's Long Shadow, and it calculated livestock greenhouse gas emissions at 18%. But it was badly overestimated. It has been revised, and transportation contributes far more greenhouse gases. Now, in deconstructing these environmental issues, there's a new paper out that I was really encouraged to see in December. I've read it myself. I'm not a scientist, so I've actually asked a scientist to interpret it for me, and she's doing that right now. But here's my unscientific attempt at interpreting this paper. If you had 10 pounds of vegetables and 10 pounds of meat, yes, those vegetables, those 10 pounds would have a smaller carbon footprint, but they would sustain fewer people. So you can't compare purely based on what it takes to produce by using just the volume. You have to look at what kind of nutrition it offers. And we know that meat is the most nutrient-dense food out there. It sustains more people. And this is the paper, and very good piece that was in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. So we are going to interpret it further with scientific credibility and distribute it, and I'll be happy to get it to you guys because I think it's really, really useful. Environmental issues, water, they're becoming bigger and bigger issues for millennials. When we originally started our Meat Myth Crushers polling, which was about 5 years ago, we asked 2,100 Americans to indicate their agreement with myths that were reported in media, films, books, and movies. And we then took the top myths and posed them to these experts and asked them to respond to them. So back then, the environmental issues were down at the bottom, but we're seeing them re-emerging at the top. But I'm going to show you these myths, and I hope you'll actually get something. Even people who know a lot about agriculture always tell me I did not know that. The number one myth out there was hormones in poultry. People think that we're getting hormones from poultry, and many people will claim, and that's why girls are developing earlier, that sort of thing. And the image at the right is from the film Food, Inc. But the fact is that hormones, well, first of all multicellular organisms contain hormones. There's nothing that's living that doesn't have a hormone in it. But we often hear hormone-free. Nothing can be hormone-free. Livestock and poultry can be produced without added hormones, but nothing can be hormone-free, and hormones cannot be used in pig production, poultry production. Poultry sizes increase due to breeding. But they also believe the same thing about pork. This was the number 2 myth. And the facts are that, again, we can't use hormones in pig production. The breeding techniques we use are why pigs are bigger today. Now, we do use hormones in beef. So, that's true. They do believe they're present, but they also believe they're unsafe, which is incorrect. And they believe that hormones in beef will increase hormone levels in beef eaters, which is incorrect, or that added hormones can cause problems like cancer. Well, here are the facts. Soybean oil has 908,000 nanograms of estrogen. And you compare that to beef from an implanted cow, which has 10, or beef from a non-implanted cow, which has 7. I thought I had another slide in there. Yeah, here we go. And you look at this. Pregnant women have 90 million nanograms of estrogen per day circulating in their body. A 3-ounce serving of beef from an implanted cow has 1.9. So this is really negligible. And even adult men have 100,000 nanograms of estrogen circulating in their body. Myth number 4, meat consumption, saturated fat, and heart disease. We eat too much meat, it has saturated fat, and this causes coronary heart disease. Well, much to the surprise of many people, we are eating the right amount of meat. The 2010 guidelines and now the 2015 guidelines, the advisory committee reports both found that we're eating the right amount of protein. Only food group consumed at proper levels. Men are eating 6.9 ounces and women are eating 4.4 ounces. That's a picture showing the different food groups. The pie wedge, the gray, is what we should be eating. And then when it's filled in with color, it shows whether we're eating that amount. And if you look, the purple is meat. So we're filling in our pie right, but we're under-consuming all these other foods and over-consuming fats, oils, and sugars. But there are about 40 cuts of meat that qualify as lean, and they can be part of a very balanced diet. A new Harvard study found no relationship between saturated fat and heart disease. And Nina Teicholz, author of The Big Fat Surprise, is really blowing up the whole hypothesis about meat and heart disease. And that's the study. Antibiotic use, big issue I know you're looking at, and what you may be hearing is that antibiotic use is increasing, meat contains antibiotic residues, and eating meat from animals that received antibiotics can cause resistance in people. The facts. FDA regulates the use of antibiotics. The vast majority are used to treat, prevent, and control disease. And when we use them early, we can actually use less. Livestock that have been given antibiotics have to go through a withdrawal period. USDA monitors to ensure that no residues are present. And national monitoring shows the incidence of antibiotic-resistant bacteria on raw meat and poultry is extremely low. All bacteria, whether resistant or not, are killed by heat. Now here's a big one, sodium nitrite sources. When you ask people about sodium nitrite, they think that most of it comes from cured meats and that, but actually 93% of nitrite intake comes from nitrate-containing vegetables like spinach, beets, cabbage, celery, lettuce, etc. Nitrate becomes nitrite in the mouth when it contacts the bacteria, and less than 5% of your daily nitrite intake comes from cured meats. They also think that nitrite causes cancer, and that if you want to reduce cancer risk, you should eat meat without nitrite. Well, nitrite is actually what makes meat safe because it prevents botulism, which is the most deadly of the foodborne illnesses. And after nitrite safety was questioned in the late 70s, the National Toxicology Program undertook a long rat and mouse feeding study and fed them very high levels of nitrite, and an expert panel reviewed the data on May 18th, 2000. I was so excited about this study that I went into labor and had a baby that day, so that's why I remember the date. And they concluded that nitrite did not cause cancer. So it's not on the master list of carcinogens. But new research is revealing nitrite's health benefits. It controls blood pressure, it promotes wound healing, it treats sickle cell anemia and other conditions. And if you ever hear them talk about Viagra and the ingredients in Viagra, it's in Viagra. Meat is less safe today than in the past. What you may have heard is that there are higher levels of bacteria, and that this is because of the way we process our meat in these factories. That's wrong. New antibacterial technologies have reduced bacteria dramatically. E. coli was down in the last decade by 63%, Listeria down 69%, and foodborne illnesses overall are on a sustained downward trend, according to the CDC. Okay. Meat plants have continuous inspection. People think we don't. They get mixed up with FDA plants, which are inspected less frequently, but we've got inspectors in our plants every day. And inspectors can and do take actions. Trust me, we have a regulatory response unit, so we know how often they take actions every day. Myth number 10, there's little oversight of animal welfare in plants and no economic benefit derived from humane handling of livestock. That is absolutely wrong, and abuse is absolutely uncommon. Enforcement of humane slaughter rules is continuous in meatpacking plants. Inspectors take a wide variety of actions. They can shut down the plant, and they do. And there are distinct quality benefits derived from good welfare. Here are pictures of meat that have come from stressed animals. Pork gets dry, firm, and dark, or pale, soft, and watery, and we get dark cutters in beef, and these all result in reduced values. So biology and ethics work together when it comes to welfare. There's absolutely an economic and a moral incentive to do the right thing. Myth number 11, we can thank Michael Pollan for this. It's unnatural to feed cattle corn and grain. Cattle are herbivores, they aren't meant to eat it, that's wrong, and that corn isn't good for cattle. Well, all cattle are grass-fed. But consumers, because of the way it's reported, think it's either or. You either get grass or you get corn. They don't understand the concept of finishing. So it's important to make that point clear. Corn-fed cattle spend just 20% of their lives in a feedlot. Corn is the nutritious seed of a grass, and when given the choice, if they're allowed to choose between grass and corn, they will choose corn. And this is the last myth I'm going to talk about. Beef from grass-fed cattle is safer. People think, as Dr. Oz did, that you won't get E. coli, and that feeding cattle hay prevents E. coli, and that is wrong. E. coli can be found in the gut of all cattle, regardless of diet. It's found in the gut of wild animals, like deer, that are never fed corn or other grains. And USDA data show that E. coli is found at a rate of about 1 in 400 samples, regardless of the production method, and it is destroyed by cooking. Oh, I'm sorry, I had one more myth. Also, beef from grass-fed cattle is more nutritious. Also wrong. And please, don't think I'm disparaging grass-fed beef. It's an excellent choice. There's just a lot of mythology about it. It is true that grass-fed beef is leaner than corn-fed beef. And it is true that grass-fed beef has higher levels of omega-3s than corn-fed beef. But again, we need the context. Saturated fatty acids are slightly lower in grass-fed beef, and omega-3s are slightly higher, but the differences are very small. So more context. Salmon contains 35 times more omega-3s than beef, regardless of the production method. So here are the myths. What do we do about it? Well, we have to engage. You know, we used to say, I'm not going to dignify that with a response. I'm not going to go on the air with Michael Pollan because I just disagree with him. We can't use that excuse anymore. Those were pre-internet lines. All these myths live on the internet, so it's really important that we be vigilant because others will fill that vacuum. I used to say to reporters when ABC would call, I would say, well, let me see if I have a spokesperson available. I'll get back to you. Now I say yes, because I'd rather cancel than give up the opportunity, because if I take time to ask and see who we've got and if we want to do this interview, I might find out that an animal rights activist has my seat. So it's important that we be fearless about this. We also have to be real. People trust people with whom they have something in common. So it's important that we try to share information in our spheres of influence with our family and friends, and that we use social media to share information. Something is much more credible if it's shared by you than if it's just coming out of me in Washington, D.C., because people at your church, your civic group, in your family, in your neighborhood, they trust you more. We also have to be timely. Things move so quickly today. We cannot let perfection be the enemy of the good. We used to say, well, the study just came out, I'm going to need some time to review it. I'll get back to you tomorrow. We can't say that anymore. We have to be able to give some kind of reaction. And we might give a second, more in-depth reaction the next day, but we have to react. And we have to be as active and as passionate as the critics are in reaching people, in getting out to people, in not dismissing people, in giving them meaningful experiences with agriculture. I have a second job, and it's called Assistant Scoutmaster of a Boy Scout troop. I won the most camping nights in the troop last year, and I'm very proud of that. But one of my favorite experiences has been watching my son, who, by the way, made Eagle Friday night. Big news, very exciting. I've got one more to go. He did the Animal Science Merit Badge, and I hooked him up with a person who had a sheep farm. And she said, well, what do you want for dinner? He said, spaghetti and meatballs. So she made homemade spaghetti and meatballs. So I called at about 8:30 and I said, how are the spaghetti and meatballs? And he said, oh my God, Mom, we haven't eaten yet. Jeez, we had to take care of these animals. I guess on a farm, the animals come first. Now, that may seem silly to you, but that was an important lesson for a city kid to learn. And then she woke him up at 4 a.m. and said, we have some lamb, come and get out of bed. And so he went out there and she said, now put your hand in there and grab that leg. He said, I'm not doing that. And so she said, okay, I'll get the leg, but you're going to do the rest. So he delivered the lamb, he vaccinated, he, tail banded, all of it. And that experience, and he's had dinner with Temple Grandin. Temple comes to our house. I'm good friends with Temple. He went to our animal care and handling conference. I created what I call Junior Janet. He goes into his classes, and when his teachers or fellow classmates make uninformed statements, he has enough information, thanks to that Animal Science Merit Badge, to rebut it. The problem is you can't get the merit badge if you can't go to a place that has livestock. So if you ever want to be a merit badge counselor, call me, because I've got all the materials and I'm willing to help you do it. But I think those kinds of experiences for youth are what is really going to change minds when they're being exposed to Food Inc. and the like. We need to hold people accountable. Again, I'm not going to respond to that ridiculous statement. I can't tell you how many indignant letters I write. And I write them all the time to the New York Times. I call reporters. I just don't let people off the hook, because they may argue with me, but hopefully it gives them food for thought the next time that they write a story. We can't just tell, we have to show. The younger generation is very visually focused. They're used to watching YouTube and everything, and they don't want to listen to words. They want to see. We have a Glass Walls series. If you haven't seen it, search Glass Walls Temple Grandin. Temple has done 3 videos for us where we go into packing plants and we show slaughter. We show everything, because there's research to show that even uncomfortable things, if you show it to somebody and explain it done right, we inoculate them against activist videos that show things being done wrong. So those videos have been viewed about 800,000 times. They've been a remarkable success, and I can't even count the times that they're being shown in classrooms, because teachers are requesting them on DVD. They can't access YouTube a lot of times in their classroom, so we give them out for free. We're going to do a sheep video this year. We've already got pork, turkey, and beef. We're going to do a sheep video and probably veal. So we need more programs like that where people can see either through video or through visits and let them get their hands dirty. And we need to meet them where they are. We need to communicate directly using Twitter and Facebook. If you're not on Twitter and Facebook, you really need to be. You really do. It's such an important tool for communicating. And if you have kids, you'll learn a lot. It's a good way to keep your eye on them. And we used to, I can't imagine when I started at AMI that I would have ever envisioned myself on Jon Stewart, but I did do The Daily Show, and I went on up against Neil Barnard of Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, which is actually an animal rights group. I have been on Nightline, I've been on CNN, ABC, all the big networks. I've never had so many people say, wow, I saw you on TV, as saw me on the Jon Stewart Show. Now, unfortunately, that show's going away, but I think anybody who watches that would say, I won. Neil Barnard looked like an idiot at the end of it because he was claiming that hot dogs and cigarettes were equivalent, and I rebutted it. But we have to do things that are different than what we would have done in the past, things that make us uncomfortable. But it is a whole new communications landscape. And if I had another hour, I could tell you all the great resources we have, but if anybody wants to reach me, I'm happy to share. And the last item I'm going to show you is we have to steal their playbook on occasion. You know, a lot of the activists have gone to change.org. Never thought I'd be writing a petition on change.org, but the Dietary Guidelines Committee is talking about the need to reduce meat consumption and in part to save the environment. And they've got their facts wrong. They had no environmental experts on their panel. And so we have a petition going, and the line we're using, because we have to grab attention. Never thought I'd be writing this either. Hands off my hot dog. That's our saying. We're using it on Twitter, and we have a petition that's available, and we've got about 2,000 signatures already where you can tell the Dietary Guidelines Committee, or you can tell USDA and HHS to inject some common sense when they implement the dietary guidelines recommendations.